Hello everybody and welcome back aboard the Hype Train. I of course am Sir Beardian, and today we're skipping dinner and going straight into it with Fleet Maximum Speed, which is a new checkbox on the Naval Org window that, when checked, will cause the fleet to automatically recheck their speed at the start of each movement subpulse and use the maximum available. This is going to be extremely useful for fleets that need to maintain their top speed or that might be making frequent trips into Nebula, because Nebula screw around with the top speed. It is also going to be useful for any ships that might fall into situations where they need to maintain their top speed, but might lose their max speed. Like, for example, beam ships that might be doing damage control on their engines after getting knocked out. So, very, very cool change. Love the tick. Next up, we have some changes to wealth, I suppose. In conventional start games, racers often build up huge wealth reserves due to lack of costs. This removes wealth as a consideration for many years and takes away meaningful decisions. Therefore, in C# Aurora, a racer's wealth balance can never exceed double the annual wealth. Any excess beyond that is assumed to be spent on improving the lives of its citizens. So, no more stocking up centuries of wealth reserves, guys. Those days are now over. I would actually love to see that once you do hit the cap, you get some kind of benefit for hitting that cap. Maybe like a small boost in population growth, or a small boost in morale or something like that. Because if it's improving the lives of the citizens, then I would hope some kind of benefit comes out of it. So it would be nice to see a little bit of a benefit for actually hitting that cap. Next up, another team bites the dust. Xenology teams no longer exist. Instead, a new ground unit component of 100 tons provides 0.5 xenoarchaeology points. Ground units with this component may be added to ground formations to provide a xenoarchaeology capability. All formations at the same population with a xenoarchaeology capability will combine the xenoarchaeology points. The annual chance for a race to successfully translate the alien language and symbology is equal to the xenoarchaeology points on the planet. For example, a xenoarchaeology vehicle is created with two components, giving it one xenoarchaeology point, or for about 9 BP. If a formation has 40 such vehicles, the annual chance will be 40%. The chance in any given construction phase is equal to the annual over construction length fraction of year amount. So that's cool. Pretty bog standard. It does look like Steve is converting all the teams into ship or ground unit components, so this is just basically par for the course, really. Next up, an absolutely amazing chance, but that absolutely slaughters a very, very powerful missile tactic. Missile launch detection has changed. In VB6, missiles are only detected after their first movement subpulse. This is due to the sequence of play of movement, detection, combat. Consequently, a missile ship close enough to an opponent for its missile to cover the distance in less than 5 seconds can avoid point defense entirely because there is no opportunity to detect the missile before impact. In C#, an additional detection phase takes place after missile launch, which is restricted to the detection of newly launched missiles at the point of launch. This means that no matter how close the missile ship is to its opponent, the missile will be detected if the opponent has sensors capable of detecting it. The missile will still be in the same location as a launching ship when this detection phase takes place. So in VB6, there are two ways to get around point defenses. Well, 3 if you consider just overwhelming it with more missiles, but that's expensive. There are 2 ways to completely bypass point defenses. Number 1, use laser warheads, but laser warheads are hot trash. Number 2, get in so close that they don't detect the missile, and then the only thing that can fire on them is the Qs, because Qs use special rules, because of course they do. So this change kills that dead. That is no longer a tactic. At point blank range, your missiles will still get detected. All of their point defense fire will still be able to fire upon those missiles. So that tactic is no longer available. You, at this stage, really want to be firing at... Well, I mean, to be fair, at point-blank range, their point defenses will fire, but at least you're still immune to anti-missiles. So there is that. Alright. Moving along. As part of the tactical intelligence in C# Aurora, it will be possible to determine the weapons of alien ships under the right circumstances. When a ship fires beam weapons, either in the combat phase or in the missile movement phase, so as point defense, each race which has a current active sensor contact for the firing ship will detect the type of weapon, either railgun, laser, or etc., the power of the weapon, the number of weapons fired, and the weapon range based on target location. So if it fired a target 200,000 kilometers away, you'll see that it has at least 200,000 kilometers range. When a ship launches missiles, each race which can detect the new salvo at the point of launch will detect the number and size of the launchers on the firing ship, but only those launchers that fire missiles. So this is actually new. So you could still identify beam weapons when a ship fired on you in VB6, but now you can detect missile launchers as well, which is cool. If a ship fires or launches multiple times, the interval between firing for each weapon type will be tracked. Now, this won't be perfect because the alien ship may be firing different weapons at different times, but will provide a reasonable idea. All the weapon intelligence gathered will be displayed for the alien class. So this is basically just an expansion of what's already there in VB6, which is really cool because now intel is going to be more useful and reliable and effective, really. Next, we have another relatively small change, but a very, very good one. When using a jump drive to open a jump point for other ships, the only requirement is that the jump drive capacity is large enough for the transiting ship. There is no requirement in C# Aurora for ship mounting the jump drive to be as large as the transiting ship. Relatively small jump tenders or bases will now be able to open a jump point for much larger ships. This is an awesome change because the problem with VB6 using jump tenders is that you have to fill that mass, right? If you have a jump drive that's 10,000 tons and it wants to be able to jump 25,000 tons, you now have to cram 15,000 tons worth of stuff into that ship. Now, the standard strategy is to just use fuel tanks because they're relatively cheap and they are big and fuel is never not useful to have, right? So that's the standard strategy. Now you no longer have to do that because as cheap as fuel tanks are, it's still tonnage, it's still mass, it's having to build up those shipyards that are capable of building it. And what's really good is that it also kind of inverts it a little bit in the sense that like a lot of the time you have an upper limit of how big of a ship you can jump, which is based on your shipyards. So if your shipyards are 10,000 tons, then you really ideally can't upgrade. Like there's no point, if your shipyards are 10,000 tons, there's no point having a jump drive that's bigger than 10,000 tons. But if your jump drive has a limit of 10,000 tons because your jump tenders are 10,000 tons, then there's not much point upgrading the shipyards above 10,000 tons because they can't build a ship that can even use those jump drives. So it's a little bit of a catch-22. This gets rid of that. So that's really cool. Alright, now we have quite possibly one of the more controversial changes for C#, the Meson update. So Mesons have the following changes for C#. Number one, their cost is based on the same principles as a laser, so Mesons will cost the same as an equivalent laser of the same tech level. I believe this makes them significantly cheaper now. So Mesons are going to be a lot cheaper now. Number two, Mesons penetrate shields as before, but their ability to penetrate armor is now limited. A new tech line exists, Meson Armor Retardation, which is the chance for each layer of armor to stop the Meson. This starts at 50%, then 40%, then 32%, etc., finishing at 7% for tech level 12. This is the big change. This is it. This is the big one. Now, armor actually is not completely useless against Mesons. You cannot just completely bypass Mazons. You cannot completely bypass armor by having Mazons. This really, really badly affects the Swarm, assuming they still exist even remotely the same form that they did in VB6. More on that in a later episode. It severely limits, because, like, hang on, let's do some math.
Okay.
So, here we have some tables. So, on the left one, we have at the base chance of 50% to penetrate each layer of armor. And then on the right, we have the 7% chance to be blocked, or 0.93 chance of penetrating the armor. As you can see, at the base tech level, it takes like only 4 layers to effectively render Mazons almost completely useless, right? 6.25% chance to actually get through all 4 layers of armor. 4 layers is easy. Even the earliest ships are going to have 4 layers. So early base tech Mazons are basically going to be almost useless. They're going to be completely useless because they only deal 1 damage and they fire 1 shot. So you can see, rule 4, if armor does not stop the Mazon, it scores 1 point of damage on the armor, right? And rule 5, if a Mazon hits the damaged armor location, it only has to penetrate the remaining armor in that location. That's basically the same as every other weapon. So yeah, you know, a 6.25% chance to penetrate 4 layers of armor. That is terrible. That is absolutely terrible. Especially when it only fires once, so it doesn't even fire multiple times like the Gauss or the railgun. And it only fires once, and it only does 1 damage. So, yeah. On the other hand, once you get it up to the high tech levels, it still takes only about 9 layers of armor, which is not difficult to do at high tech levels, to render the chance to penetrate 50%, right? So effectively halves the effective damage output of those Mazons. Once you get up to like 20, 25 layers of armor, you know, you're losing like 80% of your damage output, because the power of Mazons is the fact that it bypasses the armor and it bypasses the shields and it hits the internal components directly. And now that much fewer shots are actually hitting the internals from each salvo, you also have to deal with the fact that you still have to overcome the hit-to-kill values of components, some of which are now significantly tougher. So that is where the controversy comes from, because Mazons are OP. Out of all the cannons, Mazons are probably the most OP when you can get them in mass quantities, because there is no defense against them. The only defense against them is to go fast enough that they can't hit you. And if they put them on fighters or anything that's fast and accurate, you're not going to get that. So, yeah, they are ridiculously overpowered. Now, they're expensive, and you do need to put them on something that is very fast and accurate. But at the end of the day, you hit them a couple of times, you knock out all their little components, and then the rest of the ship just falls apart as you tear them to pieces. Provided that, you know, you can get close enough, but that's a different matter entirely. So now, this is an absolutely massive nerf to Mazons. And I do not know if they are going to be able to actually recover from this. I do not know if they're going to be able to recover from this, because it is just so much damage potential lost. But they did need a nerf. They really did need a nerf. Okay. Let's move along from the small single damage complete penetrators to the big daddies of guns. Shock damage. So, the recent debate on Mazons highlighted some issues with shock damage at higher levels, because shock damage at high damage is also ridiculously overpowered. Therefore, shock damage in C# Aurora will operate as follows. Number 1, the chance of shock damage is equal to the damage caused to armor divided by the size of ship in hull size. For example, a 9-point warhead versus a 6,000-ton ship has a 7.5% chance of shock damage. A 16-point energy impact versus that 10,000-ton ship has an 8% chance of shock damage. Any damage with less than a 5% chance is ignored as too small. So any damage with a strength is less than 5% of the ship in hull size. If shock damage occurs, the shock damage is rolled normally up to 20% of the armor damage. So what this means is that, once again, this is a big buff to large ships. Large ships are much more resilient to shock damage now because they divide the damage dealt or damage received by a much higher number. So they reduce the chances that they're going to receive the shock damage in the first place, which is fantastic. Because one of the big things, right, is that in VB6, after about 25 points of damage, your shock damage is almost guaranteed. And then you're dealing about 10 damage a pop, right? When you're dealing with high tech and you're doing like 100 damage on a hit, you're going to guarantee shock damage. You're going to be doing about 30 damage. That's enough to knock out a 50 hull size engine in one go, right? Who needs to punch through armor when the shock damage does all the damage for you, right? So, yeah. Shock damage also needed a nerf, so yeah, it's good. It also does have a reduction in the amount of damage actually dealt, which is down to 20% from 33%, I believe. So, yeah, this is a good nerf to shock damage. So all the super penetrating damage is now significantly reduced, which brings shields and armor, well, which makes armor in general, actually, because shields are still equally functional, except against still equally functional. Armor is now, once again, relatively effective. So, where the armor damage is easily divisible by 5, for example, a 15-point warhead, there is a random roll from 1 to max shock damage, 1 and 3 in this case. Where the armor damage is not divisible by 5, the max shock damage is the amount divisible by 5, rounded down, plus a percentage chance of an extra 1 max shock damage equal to the percentage of 5 remaining. For example, a 12-point warhead will be assigned 2 max shock damage, approximately 60% of the time, and 3 max shock damage, 40% of the time. So yeah, it's significant changes to the super penetrating damage. I personally prefer my own rebalance in my VB6 mod for Mazons, where they start out really, really big and really, really energy hungry and really, really expensive, and then they get smaller at high tech levels. Because it doesn't change how Mazons work. You're still going to get all that penetration, but you can't make fighters from day one. Because that's the big problem with Mazons. With the basic 10 centimeter Mazon, you get the 10 centimeter Mazon, you get Mazon focusing 1, you're done. You don't need a bigger Mazon, because who gives a shit? You're going into point blank range anyway. You don't have to outrange anything. You're not trying to outrange anything. All you're doing is getting as many guns on target, and there's nothing that gets you more guns on target than 10 centimeter Mazon. And with charge level 3, you're firing every 5 seconds. You can't beat that. You can't beat that. A 10 centimeter laser can't beat that. So it's just so cheap in the research point cost, not even if the material cost is more expensive. But that is it for today. Bit of a ramble, but them's the breaks. Join me tomorrow where we continue covering the changes for C# Aurora every day this month until launch, which, by the way, is actually expected to be a little bit more than a week from today. Steve has said that he is taking one more week to get the rest of the game sorted out and get everything wrapped up. Then he's doing the code obfuscation on the weekend, assuming everything goes right. And then we can probably expect the release, right near the end of March. Maybe a fraction into April. Personally, I think it would be hilarious if he launches it April 1st, because nobody's going to believe it. So, yeah. Alright, down below in the comments, links to the official Aurora Discord, Reddit, and forums, where you can join the discussion and the hype. And I will see you next time.